of Edgeworx.
That's right.
So,
Thanks very much. Thank you. Good morning. Thanks for joining our presentation on network performance monitoring and application visibility. We'll briefly walk you through a couple of technology areas that we feel are of interest for the topic of today. I won't pay a lot of attention about who we are, what we do. We'll make sure that you get the slide deck through the Kenheit organization to your environment as well. We're a system integrator. We're here actually representing a number of vendors in the space of application performance monitoring and visibility on the fourth floor. The approach that we take is a very pragmatic way of a solutions integrator in building solutions, and definitely want to share some of the background with you as we go along. Very little background on me. This is me in the mid-80s working behind a number of VAX VMS systems, or at least I see a couple of people smiling, so it must be a known thing. Those were the days that you had to really worry about a central system and lots of VT100 terminals behind it. And we kept on reading these kind of books as well at the same time, thinking that the answer to the universe was really 42. And we started naming machines that way as well. And one of the machines that we used was Marvin. And so that was obviously the world. So a lot easier at the time, I think. Although you might argue on those kind of things. So worries back then on the Ethernet front, not really. I mean, I'm not sure how many people in the room know what that big box is up there, but you should. Yeah, you saw it all. That's good. Yeah, so really just flipping back on this one very briefly, it's the only worries you really had was just 10 megabit of Ethernet. That was it. You only could connect a number of machines using that thick piece of yellow plumbing onto it. And the only thing you had to worry really was that you didn't drill the hole too far down into the core of that cable, because that was the only way to mount an Ethernet cable. No RJ45, let me assure you, that was definitely not available at the time. Worries today, from a complete different nature, for sure. We have a lot of other issues to deal with, the volume of data, the connectivity level, the number of devices that are out there in the field completely give us a different challenge to look at and to work with. So yeah, let's have a look at that, what traffic is nowadays. This was definitely not my Ethernet cable at the time, but it surely is what's happening today. You see lots and lot of traffic, and really I'm going to use this picture every now and then in my presentation is to really say, well, why is some traffic even accessing your infrastructure? This would be your IT infrastructure. What's on the road, and should it really be on the road today? I mean, here's definitely a business user, assuming that this top rack has a lot to do with his business, but I'm not even sure if all the others are supposed to be on that infrastructure. So some of it is valid traffic, others is probably mostly harmless, and other traffic might not be there or shouldn't be there at any given time. And at night, it's not much different, to be honest. So traffic is not just there for a reason. So we'll have that situation 24/7 nowadays. It's not just a temporary thing in life. So these are basically some of those key questions and the basics that we try to address from technology nowadays in your role at managing IT and infrastructures, as well as a system integrator as us, when we come in and simply answer these questions. Why is that traffic? Why is it so slow? Is it the network again? So really those are the areas. And taking that one step further in traffic, and you see that somewhere that business application is out there. And I've made some assumptions here on traffic, but yeah, help me out here. What's wrong with this picture if this would be your internet, or in your internet connection, or your local network today? I mean, what's wrong with the picture here? Help me out. Sorry? Bandwidth, definitely bandwidth. Yeah. So bandwidth is one, and they're all over the place. Those trucks are literally jamming the network. They're not organized in any sort of fashion. I mean, there might be recreational traffic. Well, I know there is some, but I'm not even sure nowadays if this is recreational. Training is a YouTube flow, so that's definitely not recreational anymore. Looks like there are no rules, and we're fighting for bandwidth, and the battle is, and yeah, got some visibility, looks like it. So HTTP port 80. Big deal, got it. But what's inside it? Is it an application? That's my business. Is it my report card? And Funny enough, I only discovered this afterwards, there's hardly any return traffic, so it looks like I don't get any acknowledgements. So we're waiting and timing out on the infrastructure itself. So all in all, it's a hard time managing an infrastructure and still getting the blame for it that it's not performing well. So back to the real issues. I mean, traffic is nice. I use the analogy because at least my mother-in-law still understands what I'm doing when I'm back home and asking her how did the day go. But it's all about these kind of issues that you're confronted with at some point in time. It's definitely now getting more and more in the US, a lot of attention about accessing the infrastructure, granting students access and giving them a fair share access to the infrastructure, giving them the ability to actually run their program and their curriculum the way they should be able to get access to it. As well as the copyright issue, the ability that you should be taking into account that you need to be sure that traffic or data that's leaving or coming into your infrastructure is legitimate data and it's not being copied over and over again. So those are some of the topics that I would briefly like to present to you using some of the technologies and the vendors that we represent here today at Kenheid. Traffic management, security threat detection, obviously the move into the cloud. I've attended a couple sessions yesterday as well, email cloud services, in that service, as well as the BYOD, of course, and mobile identity and access management. So those are just some of the topics. I'm going to use a kind of a use case. So you'll see this picture popping up a couple of times just to highlight where those different areas will come into play. So one of the technologies that we like to present and share with you is everything to do with net flow visibility and security and threat control. Briefly touch on, of course, BYOD, but specifically, and certainly one of the demos we have running upstairs in our room at 4007, is mobile identity and access management, a really cool way of further identifying who's accessing my infrastructure, not just by device, but by user and a specific fingerprint and footprint on it. We're getting more and more the needs, back to that traffic diagram that I show you in a traffic highway, is how can I monitor my infrastructure and understand what's out there? How can I feed a number of tools to really start diagnosing the infrastructure properly? So another technology there. And last but not least, get to the point that once we need to access the cloud or the external infrastructure, how can we further police and control traffic on the wide area network using QoS technologies and traffic shaping rules? There are some vendor labels attached to this. That's just the way it works in life. So these are some of the vendors that we like to present with you. So let's have a look at that scrutinizer picture on NetFlow. Again, back to this traffic picture. Now we're no longer talking about that mostly harmless piece of data that's floating back and forth, but it talks about what we actually see. It's not just the traditional, here's another NetFlow product that we work with. The basics are all there. Of course, you need to know what the top talkers, the top listeners are, but it's getting more and more today to a point that you need to understand what flow analytics are all about. When did this IP address show up last week? How much did it differ in usage and pattern from today? Was there a 2% utilization last week, and is it 20% today? Those are things you like to see flagged somewhere in a console, that you get a good understanding what we interpret as flow analytics, where you make the very specific analysis, or are being done for you in this case, where you can follow a certain IP behavior or network behavior in your infrastructure itself. So that goes way beyond just showing you, here were the top conversations, and this was the amount of data that's being sent between those two devices. Feel free to ask any questions in the meantime, by the way, so some of these talkers. So what Scrutinizer is, for those of you not too familiar with NetFlow or SFlow or JFlow is an embedded mechanism inside switches and routers, which will report the usage on IP conversations in between any end station in the network itself. The Scrutinizer environment builds that information, so it takes that data off line, so it doesn't really sit on your router, it doesn't do anything with the system itself. It just feeds the data in a repository and gradually builds a dashboard with the different viewpoints that you would like to see. From the very basics, here are my top talkers, here's my bandwidth utilization, all the way down to those flow analytics kind of setups. And that will give you charts like these, where you can see literally your inbound and your outbound traffic flows. You see your top first series here. The cool thing here is that down at the bottom, you see lots and lots of subtabs. It's not losing any conversation. It will not just say, well, here were the top 100 and that's the end of it. It will maintain that in its repository for you. So that's a very key element for people who've been working with NetFlow in the past and say, well, I've lost most of my data because I only saw a skimmed section of it. The scrutinizer will keep that data in its repository. It will then do lots and lots of additional analytics for you in the background. You typically don't see this until it starts flagging in a red element up, and it will give you the drill down of that kind of information. And it even, for the fact that it actually gives you that outbound and inbound conversation connectivity, will show you information that could be very relevant for you where you're monitoring students accessing Desire to Learn or any other distant learning platform in your environment. So being able to clearly identify where and the health of traffic when it's using it, all by using NetFlow data and metrics from your switches and routers. It doesn't need to install anything else on your system. So once you got that picture sort of in place, you get to a point that you also want to be able to identify those very same users in your infrastructure, where you want to have either based hardwired connected or on the Wi-Fi level, the ability to identify, okay, why is this user even accessing my infrastructure at today? And is that user given any traffic lane for that matter, if it is? And last but not least, you don't want that to be an anonymous IP address floating on your network. You want to be able to further and further identify that user through an access management and access methodology point of view. And last but not least, too, depending on how far you build that infrastructure out, you can actually get to the point where you can actually identify what services can I assign to that individual user profile. With the Enterasys, so our second vendor that we brought to Kenheit this year, we bring in a number of very advanced technologies where identity and access management rules can be quickly deployed inside your existing HP Cisco environment, or even based on the Enterasys platform itself on top of it, using network access control mechanisms, where having that solution in place, it will give you the ability to further identify user access control in the network itself. Just to give you an example, in a kind of an illustration like this, these are all, or not even all, these are a number of the 45 potential ways of identifying a user using their technology in their access methodology, where it could be based on access type, on device type, so you can have OS-based rule sets in your access control environment. Obviously the device itself, the location, well, you can follow sort of the tab as you can see here. So very quickly, and last but not least, even in conjunction with third parties, where you can really build in mobile device management utilities that not just are within a certain product set, but you can have it verified against threat health levels. So you clearly can discard or disconnect or not even allow users who have an unhealthy system that they're trying to connect onto your network even before it accesses the infrastructure itself. So again, with those kind of technology, it goes way beyond what you would typically see today in granting access based on a radius access code or an authentication through your Active Directory by saying, yep, this is Joe Smith, and yep, I'll allow an access, that's the end of it. You really need to really work and look into technologies that are addressing one or more of these. And one or more really means that, although this seems a very complex chart, you can pick and choose. You can go and flow through this role structure by identifying which of those technologies make sense and how you would like to deploy that solution and which policy you want to attach to an individual user at the far end. So it's up to you to define that profile based on time, on user, on organizational unit, and last but not least, of course, as I mentioned before, when you want to embed it into third-party solutions at the same time, so you can validate what the health status is of that user. So looking at technology in general, and if you're in that process of doing so, make sure that you also look at not just that access controller or that device that will give you the best, fastest way of accessing your network. Make sure that you're also addressing an issue like this, where it has everything to do with how does it embed with health characteristics, so you can actually discard or not allow user connects to happen based on these kind of rule sets. So once we got those users connected, we need to be able to further police that traffic, because we all know that this fancy internal network has gigabits of availability and gigabits of bandwidth available. Unfortunately, we don't necessarily see that same amount of 10 gig kind of switching capacity flowing all the way through to every wide area network connection out there. So we need to very, very strictly control and work on the access layer outbound. As much as we grant the access here, we need to continue that path in order to completely stretch our QoS and end user experience to the furthest point possible. So in this process here, my traffic side, where do I truly identify a number of? And this is just a very small set, and we'll have a couple more use case examples in a moment, where you can really say, well, okay, am I supposed to be here at all? And what type and volume of traffic do I have? And is it even a business application? If so, I grant that access to that connection itself. Because going back to the real life situation, and anecdotally I'm using those traffic lanes just to make that reference, is that there is a clear shortfall. The growth in need of bandwidth and use of applications will simply outpace the availability of bandwidth. It's a simple fact. We can argue about it by saying, well, we should maybe have a good conversation with the users or with the students. It's happening and it's changing. More importantly, a lot of this is changing because it's always been bad labeled as that is just recreational traffic, so we should ban it, get it out of the infrastructure completely. Well, clearly that's no longer the case. We really have to treat video streaming or any other, even to that extent, vendors are using BitTorrent for very legitimate reasons and good reasons, by the way. So you need to be able to get to policies that can further highlight exactly what's happening in this model, that you can truly create these solutions. We've built solutions for customers who said on that very same Friday, for the very first time, the VP's video conference on the Friday was a fantastic session for a change, because nobody else was interfering with that. Without having to carve out that tunnel for 24 hours, we carved it out for 3 till 5 on the Friday afternoon. This technology really did that for the single customer. And at the same time, we were out there at City Hall and we were looking at the firewall and the fire department itself, who used tons and tons of training material, and they were banned by the firewall. There's no video streaming, period, end of it. There was no subclassification possible to have those users based on an Active Directory log in to get access to legitimate video streams. Technology like this makes that simple. It's the user that's being identified properly, has access to the local infrastructure, and then obviously also needs that access to the outside infrastructure based on rule sets that comply to it. And yep, there might still be a happy hour somewhere in that window that allows for the football highlights, unless you're the football league authority yourself. Obviously, then it becomes a business app all of a sudden for whatever reason. So clearly you want to go to building intelligent policies. Don't just raw decide yay or nay, or yes, it's going to happen only after 6. It's a 24/7 economy. So we have to deal with policies that can be dynamic, that can make use of the bandwidth that's available also in a very dynamic way, and giving you the ability then to start optimizing policies to build a profile identifying who the user is, the application is, the location to and from. So it's not just a one-way system, it's also data that's coming back into your infrastructure when you're accessing the environment itself. So that's where you start slicing the elements into, starting with visibility, the fact that you can actually run layer 7 analytics on data packets in the network. You can start controlling the infrastructure as I've described here, where no longer the chaos is on your external wire, but it becomes a predictable element of access. And the third layer is getting to an optimization stream where you can further enhance the application acceleration using web caching and caching techniques between two endpoints in your network. So here's one example. I'm not going into too much detail, but just to give you an idea of once you build policies, how simple it is. These are rule sets that you can build within a few minutes. We're not talking about PhD kind of technology. You define who the user is. When we come into assignments, and by the way, that's for any of the products that I've described so far, we just talk in the business language. We'll ask you, what are your key applications? What are your key users? And building a policy is literally as I'm showing it to here. That's just a simple checklist by saying, well, here are my priorities. Here's the share I want to give in a certain time frame. And you deploy the technology and activate it. It is literally as simple as that, and that will give you something that can highlight just a specific application stream. So in that way, and that also goes for the vendors that I showed before, we build specific profiles that fit your business. If it's education, if it's finance, if it's manufacturing, that will represent this. And by now we have a library, and that we know like this is like a common way of doing it, or this is a typical mechanism that fits your type of organization. And for education, we've done it at various universities and colleges already throughout Canada for that reason. Then at some point in time, you have that urge, that need to really look at data and start to analyze traffic as it flows through your network, where you have an environment where currently, whenever you want to measure anything in your local network and put out a thermometer or a stethoscope and start to listen to the heartbeat, you have to fight for access. For those of you familiar with network monitoring and span port technology, whenever you want to have access to this switch in order to really start capturing data, there's already a device using it. And it's already plugged in, and don't you dare plugging it out, because just imagine what would happen if we need to capture data and you unplugged it to have another device connect onto the network. So typically what you would see that if you want to access multiple devices in an infrastructure, the first thing you really don't want to do nowadays is to start reconfiguring your core switches. You want to really leave those devices as is, as much as you can, and giving no further access to users to start adding more VLANs to it or mirroring data from one port to another port. So clearly what you're getting is all sorts of scenarios where one of these could apply, where you have a network monitor in place, but because the span port was only configured for half of the network to be outputting data, you don't see all the data that you need to see on the network. And this side, you have a data recorder that's overloaded because it just happened to get all the data, where it never really intended to capture all the data, nor has the capacity to even store the data on the infrastructure. So clearly, you're running into an environment where you need to have a mechanism sitting in between here that can not only share ports and output from one single span port to multiple devices in the network itself, but it has to do more. It has to clearly run a number of filters in the center to identify what kind of data do I truly want to see feed into a tool at the far end of my network. If I have a web analytics tool, I only need HTTP traffic or HTTPS, and maybe on a port 80 and 8080 traffic. So I truly want to be able to have a filter function here that will feed the information to the tool that doesn't need all the other stuff and all the other data in the network. Now you can do that in a very, and let me just briefly skip through these to this slide because I wanted to show this one first. You can do this in a very rudimentary way by just plugging cables or having a smart switch sitting in the middle. One of the reasons why we started to work as a solution team with Ixia and UI is the fact that you can get in a very simple methodology. I mean, if you know how to use Visio or even use a decent PowerPoint way of setting up screens, this is the way to do it. You literally have an overview on your left side of all your network ports. You define and create your remote ports, which you define as a tool. And the only thing you literally do is typically would drag this point across to this point. And the only thing that would happen really is it creates a dynamic filter in the middle automatically. And the cool thing is that we like as system engineers is that it's by default blocked. It doesn't allow any traffic unless you tell it to actually start filtering a certain type of data stream in your infrastructure. So in this scenario here, the operator or the system engineer actually connected these two, but this is the typical first diagram that will show up. I'm not allowing any traffic, so there's no security risk in it at all. So it doesn't start dumping tons of data on the wire unless you start defining specific filters. As you can see here, this already shows a very interesting granularity of how far can you actually go into detail to start defining that every port, the output port of this server tap actually feeding into a filter that is defined as a layer 3, layer 4 filter. It only scans data that is SQL filter based and then feeds it onto a data recorder, period. That's all the data that ends up in the data recorder. Nothing more, nothing less. And oh, by the way, that same maybe engineer on this side also requested another tap port that got data from a DMZ filter. And it's also entering into the same data connector. I didn't touch anything on my core switches. The span ports were just feeding data into the aggregator, and I'm defining at this level and actually reusing some of the filters, as you can see here, to actually feed the tool set at the far end of my network. And that actually gives me, let me just quickly jump back to two examples of how to use it. Is, as I explained before, we have a lot to do with a limited number of span ports in the network. We typically come at customers who say, well, I only have one span port, or I have two switches, and I wish I could actually merge the data from multiple switches into a single tool. Just the tool has only one NIC, so what do? I'll put a switch in between, but then I'll start hammering the network without any filter capabilities. So clearly, the benefits here are going beyond that. So we'll bring a lot of ease of use and avoiding a lot of errors that could be entered into the network itself. So the second very key component of this Inui technology has to do with the ability of filtering. That is not just a raw piece of plumbing that is like a manifold sitting in between your main pipe and your taps in your home situation, but it's clearly processing the packets, it's filtering the data, it's even getting to a point where it can deduplicate the data and feed that into a tool set that you've defined as being the external egress port on the infrastructure itself. So the whole mechanism of filtering, stripping, slicing is one of the key areas where we believe a technology like this becomes a default component of every rec row, sort of. And that's typically how we've deployed it already at a number of colleges and universities as well, where you just see it at the end point of a row, and that's where the span ports feed in. And from there onwards, you patch it onto a number of tool outlet ports, which we typically see our users operate as there's one beneath the engineering desk where it just has the tap output port, and that's where they can plug in their device and go back to a filter GUI and define what kind of output should be flowing out of that physical wall outlet port. It's literally as simple as that in setting up that environment. So again, the filtering is one of the key functions. You'll see lots and lots of span aggregation technologies showing up in the industry. We've seen quite a few, and certainly if Colin and I go back in time now, we've really started to screening and analyzing a number of those vendors, and we truly came to a point that technology like this is out there. We've got a demo running upstairs, so if you're interested to see what that GUI looks like and how easy it is to do literally that drag and drop, by all means. We've got Ben here in the room from Plixer, Scrutinizer. We can show you the online mechanism of how to run the profiling of, the net flow analysis in the network itself. I told you before, the Interisys team has the internet access management solution and authentication solution available on the system running here as well. And last but not least, the team from Exinda, also represented here, and upstairs will be able to give you a good look and feel what the GUI looks like when you're really looking at a management platform that is getting the data in and truly using those 2,000 plus application signatures. I think, Ryan, we're up to 2,500 by now. Cranking out new application profiles over and over again. I think that's another key element, that the world's not changing, so application signatures need to be updated. The ability not just to say it's port 80 traffic, but to really look inside the port 80 HTTP flow to identify what type of application signatures can be shown on layer 7. So this is no longer a port 80 on layer 4. It's truly identifying specific application signatures inside Google Apps applications, inside HTTP, giving you the ability that you can classify traffic accordingly. Yesterday's presentation by, I believe it was University of Alberta, where they did email cloud outsourcing. Great presentation, 40,000 accounts on Google, amazing number. My obvious question at that point is, and we're having a conversation soon as well on that, is, okay, how do you identify those users? Because all of a sudden you're moving your internal 10 gig environments and usage of internal email into the cloud. What process have you followed, or have you considered following the process? What would happen to the end user experience, and how do you control that cloud connection all of a sudden? Because you're moving an important portion, a very important portion, certainly in their environment, where everything's being put into the cloud, not just staff, or not just students, I should say, because that was purely a situation where lots of traffic was still inside with mail for staff, but really then move the student environment into the cloud. Technology like this, and really everything surrounding it in this scenario, will give you that visibility from the very first moment the user accesses the network, from the NetFlow-based analytics here to the flow through on the network here, and the ability clearly to identify application and like Google application usage makes a lot of sense when you have the ability to identify those apps in the network itself. So some of the takeaways that I would like to hand off to you as well is these technologies here very much have one thing in common, and well, maybe a few of them for sure, and that has to do with quality of service, visibility, and control. And I'm on purpose using the word quality of service because typically that is something that goes back to the end user, to the student, to the researcher, to the staff members in your organization as well. It's not just about visibility for the network guy or the applications guy or the systems guy. Important, but we should really more and more start to be, like I keep on saying as well, is that we're great in building communication infrastructures, but communicating about it for some reason is a difficult task. And tools like these, technologies like these, make that a lot easier. Make it also easier for any of these to truly report about usage and new investments that are needed, and not that that's a thing of the after fact that, yeah, I could have known or I should have known. We did a demo yesterday for one of the visitors here where I used the example as well. We were showing a customer a NetFlow specific, which is a fairly technical way of network reporting in a setup where a business manager walked by and he said, that was Thursday, right? And it had nothing to do with that technical graph, but he saw his business. He saw his business day flowing by on a technical report that was NetFlow specific traffic. But it gave him some feedback, like, because he had a couple of questions that were related to it. He said, well, but why is it only that location that's pumping so much data? So he was translating that information to what is really happening on that outbound connection and why. So this type of information now create that business language in it. It's not just raw technical packet dumps. It is information that is very application aware, and in an Enterra situation give you that ability to truly identify users based on profiles, on fingerprints, on footprints, whatever you like to call it, to give that access to the network itself. So what I would like to do is I cleared those traffic lanes for you, first of all. So we've got a setup upstairs in room 4007, where we've got 4 booths in a sort of a pavilion built together. Certainly at the coffee break upstairs, you'll be able to see us because we're literally opposite. We're opposite the coffee corner anyways. So that's where we are as vendors in the setup. We as a system integrator to organize those 4 players in this setup. I hope I didn't make it too much of a Tupperware kind of presentation where it's only about products, but I definitely wanted to share technology with you in this room and also online to see how it fits in your organization from a timing point of view. The solutions, again, very complementary to each other. They can be installed literally individually, but we see more and more the synergy of technology to be one of the key elements to deliver success to your organization as well. So really, thank you very much and for your time and the information that we were able to share with you. And obviously, last but not least, in all of this, just don't panic. We have means and technology that will make it possible for you to get the information out of the infrastructure, to make sure that you will get the feedback that you can give to your businesses, to your faculties, to your senior level IT and executive level, to say, well, here's what's happening. And by the way, here is the delta between where we are now and where we could be, or where we probably will end up to be. And this is a cost implication that goes with it, bandwidth-wise, usage-wise in the network. So any questions at this point? That we have some time, about 5-10 minutes left, that we can use for any anecdotal stuff. Is it recognizable in your environment? Achievable for you to see these kind of technologies end up in your infrastructure? Again, we got the demos going. You're hesitating. Why?
No.
Okay. Okay.
I'm getting direction. Number of wired ports on the campus.
Okay.
So wireless everywhere.
Right.
What's the implication?
That's an excellent question. Actually, to be very honest, not a lot, because technically somewhere it collapses onto a wired environment, but even to the point where it's wireless, your wireless device will have to terminate onto an access point. That access point is your first NetFlow enabled device, so that will pick up any information that's NetFlow related from that point of view. That user connecting to an access point will eventually connect onto the cloud, where it will pass through an Exinder. And it will be recognized as an individual Exinder user based on its, for example, Active Directory user. So going wireless really will give you no disinvestment of any kind in this scenario, because clearly all these technologies are aimed and focused on that monitoring, visibility, and control element of it. But good question indeed, yeah. Any other questions in the room, in the virtual room? Good. Thank you very much for your time, and feel free to come back.